Welcome, Manu. Thanks for taking the time to be a guest on Being Conscious. We've been working together as known each other for a couple of years now as friends and as investors and so on. I've been fascinated with your journey, having come from Indian roots, being in US now and being a very accomplished entrepreneur professionally. You worked in a lot of major enterprises like Google and others, and you built a great venture capital firm, which you've been managing now for close to a decade or more, maybe. And I've noticed that in everything you come across as a person, not as an investor, but you come across as a great mentor, a person who vibes very well with founders. So just if you can share your personal journey and, what brought you to where you are, that'll be helpful for the audience.
No, thank you. And thanks for having me today. Yeah, it's always easy to go back and connect the dots on where you are, right? And as you live longer, you sort of figure these things out, right? I think consciousness came to me earlier through mentorship. There's people that mentored me. And at that time, it's not as obvious as it's obvious today, right? So I remember very clearly my old mentor, Rajiv Motwani, actually made me do something that seemed very foolish to me at that moment, but it really helped me over the years. So for example, he asked me to sort of think through, what do I want to do when I'm 70 years old? I'm 23 years old as a smalllet, right? And I respected him quite a bit. And so I went to the journey. It took me almost 10 months to figure that out, right? But once I had the clarity, it has actually helped me. It's now almost 25 years later, and it has pretty much kept me on track in some sense, right? And so you sort of know where your North Star is. So this old saying that, if you don't know where you're going, then any path will take you there.
Mm-hmm.
So figuring out that path, understanding, and then retesting it and being conscious about it is actually really helpful, right? So, and I remember after I signed it, I was really proud. I figured what I was gonna do later on. I went back to Rajiv and asked him, can you review and help me? And he's like, no. He's like, I don't want to look at it. He's like, it's not my purpose to tell you where your path is. That's for you to figure out. And if you figure this out, then that's good. But I cannot, as a coach, tell you what your path should have been or should be, right? That's your journey. And I think that last statement was very powerful.
Was it?
Because I thought, if he would give me feedback of great, he's a professor at Stanford, he will help me figure this out. But what he helped me figure this out was to be purposeful, thinking through things, being conscious. And even if it's wrong, but at least you knew what you were doing, right? And I think that journey really helped me sort of solidify. And I think that, and then also Kanwal would have very similar sort of feedback in terms of, an entrepreneur is always self-reflecting, right? If you're only chasing it for money, evaluations or pieces, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons, right? Purpose and what drives you, when it's really dark and things haven't been working out and you still stay the course, requires something far more than something as superficial as just chasing the next dollar, right?
So there are two important aspects you brought out, right? One is Rajiv Motwani and being conscious. You mentioned that a couple of times. So, and the second one was Kanwal, who's been, my mentor for many years. He's been a role model of an entrepreneur. Him talking about what is truly an entrepreneurship is not about just chasing valuation. So first part, you talked about being conscious, and in your definition, what does being conscious mean for a Gen Z today who is 23 years old and looking at you and saying, hey, your 23 is not the same as my 23 today? And how would you define that to a 23 today?
Yeah, no, good question. And, I think, it's, I would sort of take the same role that Rajiv did with me, right? Is to help them figure out the framework so that they can actually introspect themselves, right? I think nobody likes to be lectured to, right? It's sort of telling them by example, showing them, and then helping them sort of bridge the gap between those two, right? So for you to sort of get to that stage, there's no ready-made answers. There's no TikTok video for 30 seconds to become, to sort of learn these things. You have to sort of put the work into to make that pathway from one to the other, right? So I think something, a word called seeker comes to mind also, right? If you're seeking knowledge, if you're seeking something, you're seeking advice, right? giving feedback or advice to somebody who's not ready, who's not seeking, falls on deaf ears, right? So I think with Gen Z, I think every generation has people that pull the engine, right? You can't expect every 100% of people to be leaders. Like if everybody is an entrepreneur, the country looks like Nigeria, right? Where everybody has something to sell you.
Mm-hmm.
If you all have managers that are following, then it looks more like Japan, right? And so you need a balance between those two.
Okay.
So I think there's enough people in Gen Z, that have the hunger that will figure things out. They're going to surprise. Every generation thinks the next generation, the younger generation, doesn't have what it takes, but they do. They always come back and they surprise you, right? So I'm actually as hopeful of this generation than I was of my generation or the one previous to me, right? And but you can't expect everyone to have the same level of pull.
Yeah, before we get into the conscious entrepreneurship, where you lead it from what Kanwal mentioned earlier, you made an important point that, this generation will figure it out and lead it in the way that, previous generations have figured it out too. But the World Health Organization talks about this whole mental health crisis that is exponentially growing, especially with the amount of information and the attention that has been taken away from people's conscious attention that they used to give for themselves. That being the situation of the day, that people are not aware of where their attention is being hacked today. And World Health Organization talks about this concern. What is your take on that? And what do you think? Where do you, given that you are in the epicenter of the AI world here in the Bay Area, and you see what the power of AI is, and the power of models is, and the power of capitalism is to take away, incentives given to these builders of models to take people's attention more and more. That being said, right, I'm competing versus $1 billion invested on me every day to take my attention away. So how should I look at that?
No, I mean, I think that's, the attention economy is sort of like a drug, right? Just like you needed to have intervention for alcohol abuse or drug abuse, right? I think, being stuck to your phone or not being present is similar to the same addiction, right? You get the same endorphin rush as you do when you do this versus taking a drug, right? So I think we don't have the tools quite yet. I think, just like, people have to figure out how to address these other abuses or other sort of addiction or things similar to this piece, right? I think the compression with depression is also the fact that people are lonely. You could be surrounded by people, but you're on your phone, you something else, and you're still lonely. And seeing this connectedness, social connectedness, spending time, in the absence of screens and everything else is actually very necessary. Not for it's actually a health issue, right? And so the health issue shows up in depression, then shows up in coronary heart issues, other pieces. And so there's a very strong price to pay for this, right? So I think for medical science or professionals to sort of really bridge the gap between those. It's like, I'm not just coming to you when I have a physical manifestation of an issue. It's to actually intervene a lot earlier, right? Helping through these pieces. I think, families need to have this discussion at home, but, if as a parent, you're telling your kids not to use screen time, but to be on your phones all the time, doesn't work either, right? So I think it's a real issue, right?
Okay.
But, these depression, these things have been there for a long time. Now we measure them better than, and 30, 40 years ago, they were not measured. Lots of housewives and people that didn't have any purpose had lots of depression. They would watch TV all the time. They didn't have any interest. And I think it's a similar sort of piece, just a different pathway, right?
Now, you see a lot of founders, a lot of entrepreneurs every single day, and you've seen that for over a decade. How do you identify a founder who is a conscious entrepreneur? Is it essential, first of all? And if yes, how do you identify that? I know earlier on you mentioned that listening is a great skill, coachability is a great skill, but is there a role of consciousness in an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I'm sure there is, but we haven't been able to analyze that to sort of say whether somebody is not. But there are primary or secondary, sort of KPIs to look at, right? So, for example, we look at a thing called intellectual honesty, right? You can be, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but at some point, do you fool yourself, right? So it's also knowing what you know and what you don't know, right? And so I think founders that are really good at sort of figuring that out are able to build better teams because they know their limits, they know where they need to have somebody else. I think that in some sense is leading that the person is conscious about their own shortcomings. I know what I can do well, and I know what somebody else does.
Knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, right? It's a very nice way to define for the young entrepreneur what is consciousness in a way that do you know what you don't know?
Yeah, which is hard because you've been told so the regular type of leadership, like you need to have all the answers, right? When you go in a room, the person that speaks the loudest has the answers is the leader, right? And I think that's the misguided sort of piece, right? I think sort of sharing your shortcomings, telling your vulnerabilities, so letting people in emotionally, right? And leading by example, I think it's a better way to sort of do this stuff, right? And so also understanding that to build a company or build an organization or anything that is going to be lasting requires people of different skills and different backgrounds, different things to come together, right? So, you cannot be the one person that builds the whole thing, right? And I think having that intellectual honesty to be able to sort of bridge those gaps is very important, right? So we look at those pieces, do you have a sense of fairness? Fairness doesn't mean being equal, right? Fairness means, I think, we in our organization talk quite a bit, like, an entrepreneur or CEO especially is more like a gardener, right? I mean, we were surrounded by
Yeah.
but, a gardener, just like a gardener would actually, put water, make sure the right sunlight is there, you have the right manure, the fertilizers to make sure the plant and the vegetable, whatever, grows well. But when you see weed, taking over your garden, you have to remove the weeds as well, right? Which is sort of the euphemism for a bad employee, right? And that bad person could be your cousin, could be your roommate from college, right? But if they're not performing, they become the weed in the company. You also need to know how to remove the weed, right? Are you intellectually honest with yourself? Do you have the fairness? Because what happens by not removing the weeds in your garden, the garden gets taken over, and so you lose everything.
Yeah.
So the same thing with employees, like the bad employees, the ones that you may have gone to college with, but you recognize that there's a problem, but you don't do anything about it, actually sends the wrong signal to the rest of the team that you're not being fair, right? So the journey of a CEO is very lonely, right? So you have to be able to introspect, listen, being conscious, getting people to sort of share the journey with you. And I think it takes a very strong person to have that open vulnerability as well. And then the leadership skills to be able to sort of bridge the gap.
Yeah. You also talked about conscious capitalism and conscious capital in the recent past. And, entrepreneurship, like you mentioned, is a journey. It's and a lot of founders think entrepreneurship is a destination of achieving something, North Star. Would you call entrepreneurship as a goal or is a journey? And if it is either one, what should a good conscious entrepreneur look forward to enjoying in this journey? Because this is full of stress, full of ups and downs and everything. So how does one enjoy entrepreneurship? So these are too many questions, but just wanted to get your perspective because you've invested some time in conscious capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, journey is actually really important, right? So if there'll be ups and downs, there'll be very, things don't work out and there's a lot of stress and downturn. But understanding that, being an entrepreneur, this journey is sort of part of your being, right? The destination, the journey is the destination, right? And then even the exit happens, is at the end of the journey, right? You become a mentor, you maybe do a second company, and you also sort of realize that, you just didn't affect your life, you affected the lives of hundreds of people around you, right? So you have a burden in some sense to sort of saying, hey, and that if that brought you joy, that it wasn't just your life you changed, but so many other people's lives you changed and the impact that you had, right? And I think when you start sort of seeing this in a bigger picture, this is the best way of socialism, right? You're actually pulling the engine, you're actually helping so many people come out of poverty or changing their life. I mean, I would look at Uber. Uber has changed people's life. A mom that couldn't, work 8-hour job because you have a young child to take care of. The childcare expenses are too much, but I can go work Uber for 4 hours a day, or maybe work at late time when my kid is sleeping. It actually allowed you to sort of have a livelihood and a purpose that wasn't possible before. So I don't think Uber or Lyft would ever think of themselves as a company that helped with social good, but they did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part that the entrepreneurships are creating jobs, right? I mean, that's a very noble outcome of what you did, right? Large companies actually destroy jobs typically, right? Their job is to automate things out of the way, right? Startups actually create jobs. Yeah, it may not, it may seem antithetical now with the advent of AI, but if you look at how many AI jobs are being created and other jobs are going to be happening, I think people always worry about, things because they can always estimate what will go away, but they can't imagine what will happen. Right?
But that brings up an interesting point, because you also teach in B schools. Off late, I don't know, you're still teaching at Berkeley, okay? And given that intelligence is taken over by AI, what should people learn nowadays?
Yeah, I think so. I've always had this issue with education, that our education system was built in the age of industrial age, right? If you look at how we even call our students, right? So you're the batch of so-and-so, like your batch of 97, the class of this. So it was all designed in the sense how widgets happen. Like, my car model is 1996 model or 2005 model, right? I'm the class of 25 or 20. Yeah. So our definition of education system was built to actually supply workers for the industrial age, right? And we never adapted for the information age. Right? We haven't even adapted it for the knowledge age, right? And I think we're in the age of wisdom. So we're 3 generations behind in how our education system should have responded. So because there's a FOMO, like, if I don't do this, I don't have that. And so we continue the same, system that has actually been obsoleted in some sense, right? You and I were talking about earlier, like, what's the goal? What's the value of an MBA, right? I was sort of argue what's the value of a lot of these pieces, right? I think the way we do this stuff has to change as well, right? Students coming out, like I had a batch of students at Berkeley, so I was like, have a computer science degree. I was told if I get a degree in computer science, things will go really well. There's no job prospects, right? I mean, this is the first time, even at Stanford, these are top-notch schools. So kids coming out, majority of them don't have a job prospect, right? Or they're worried about the future. And this was never the case before, right? And so I had a simple thing to ask them, like, why are you chasing jobs? Like why can't you go create a job, right? If you look at the history of just work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were a professional, you would actually work for yourself, and then you would offer your services to other people, right? That's been there for centuries, right? It's only the last 200 years since the advent of the East India Company was the first major corporation that we have sort of gone into, like, you work for somebody else en masse, right? So now I think, we're in the golden age of work actually going back where it's supposed to be, right? I mean, think about doctors, like, these are highly qualified people, dentists, doctors, all these professionals, but the depression is very high on them as well. Because what happens, they've been taken over by a bunch of MBAs that are designing like, well, you can only spend 15 to 20 minutes per patient, right? Independent of what you think is good. And when you take highly professional people and you put them into a factory sort of setting, that, there is no agency of time. Like, I can control my time. And I think that's one of the key reasons for depression, is because, I should be able to design my time based on what I think is important. If that patient requires 45 minutes because they're suicidal, well, I shouldn't cut them to 15 minutes. And there's some other patient, there's something else. And I think, my grandfather was a physician, worked for himself, was extremely happy. He was working till the day he died, right? I see a lot of my wife's colleagues at Kaiser or Stanford that are depressed because they make very good money, or, but they don't have the agency of time. So I think what AI is allowing to do, and so instead of worrying about where it will go, I would look at, it can, do all the functions of accounting and finance and marketing and customer service and success. So you could do what you do best of delivering that service that you're good at, right? And then having these tools do the economies of scales that you would have done if you had worked for a larger company.
Sure.
So
Would you say that, would you agree that majority of humanity, uh, for them, life happens, and with the AI is presenting an opportunity for that for the humanity to really look back and say, enjoy every aspect of life and just don't live life. How would you define this opportunity that you're talking about? Because what you seem to be, unlike many who say AI is going to take away jobs, you seem to be very optimistic, saying AI is here to create better humans.
I actually think AI improves human intelligence, right? It's actually making us better, and everything from learning, right, to executing, to actually, I mean, so actually, if I take a step backwards, right, humans have always been good at making tools. What separates us from animals and other beings is that we're able to build tools, right? Whether we be made fire or wheel, all the way down to computers, everything else. We've always used tools to reduce the monotonous task, right? I can build a bow and arrow because it's easy to hunt. I can design farms because it's easy to get food. So we design tools, and we've always been very good at designing tools. So AI is just another tool, right? So every generation gets afraid of the tool that got built, right? Is because it's the unknown. But I think entrepreneurs and people, that design these things, it's also our job to explain what these things can do. I think fear is something that press and media are love doing, right? And I think the job of some the builders, the creators, is to actually explain the unknown. Yeah, we're very good at sort of seeing what can be gone, right? But we're never as good as figuring out what will be created, right? Or what jobs. I mean, how many kids do you know are influencers or want to be influencers on YouTube or TikTok, right?
Too many.
This is not a job that anybody knew 15 years ago, right? And so I think there'll be new things we're going to be doing and creating that are just going to be amazing, right? So now this notion of jobs, right? I mean, it's only less than 100 years old, right? 40-hour work week. I mean, our grandparents worked 7 days a week. Maybe they took a few hours on Sunday morning to go to Monday or the church or something else, right? But 7 days was very normal unless you were a jamindar or a royalty or something else, right? What stops you from saying that, hey, we could work 15 hours a day, a week, or 10 or 4 hours a week, right? And the machines are doing more of this work, the monotonous things that don't bring us much value, right? Sitting at McDonald's, flipping the burger all day long. Well, if that can be repeated, yes, that person lose their livelihood, but I can free them up to do something else.
So would it be fair to say that humanity was stuck in the busyness trap? With the advent of AI, you don't have to be so busy. What should then humanity do when they have so much time when they're not busy, because AI can take over a lot of their monotonous?
I'll tell you, how many of us, when you were raising your children, did you have somebody taking care of your kids, nannies and au pairs and people, right? Because we could afford it.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. But the best person who can bring value to your kids or teaching them is you yourself. And you have the most interest, you have the most pieces, but we're so busy making stuff or being at work or following up that we don't have time for the most important product we launch, which is our kids. So I think maybe getting more time with our kids would be valuable. Like the person that comes cleans my house has working for 12 hours a day, doesn't have time for kids, and so then you're not investing in the next generation, right? And then like when I was at Google, we used to joke that the cheapest babysitter we built was YouTube. So parents can take the iPad, give it to the kids.
Interesting.
And that's the babysitting tool, because now the kids are almost zoned out. So when we're giving them when they're 2 or 3 years old, then what happens when they become the new Gen Z, right? Because that's what they were trained on, right? And it's because we as parents didn't have time. So I think rather than looking at AI that will take something away, right? I think it's a combination of our society and our policies and things to think through, and sort of think, hey, how do I actually have jobs that I actually can sort of say, hey, the two spouses can work 20 hours a week.
Makes sense.
And you balance it out. So one person can be home to raise the kids and help and bring that value up. So I think the way we rearrange society, how we think through stuff, can actually also be consciously changed, right? So I think AI is sort of the trigger that may actually improve lives if we can understand the power and instead of fighting it, actually try to adopt.
With that optimism, right? I think what you're basically saying is AI is going to help the humanity, can make human more conscious, more wiser, right? So let's wrap it up with some rapid fire. So one book that you would recommend everyone to read.
Currently, I say a book by Eric Ries called Incorruptible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Manu.
Welcome.
Awesome.